Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a book that isn't your typical scientific report. It feels more like a mariner's log, one that's been sent back from a future we might be steering ourselves directly into. It's called Storms We Chose by Captain Dan Kipnis, and it's his account of a world shaped by the decisions we're making right now. Right from the jump, the author makes one thing crystal clear. This is not science fiction. Captain Kipnis is basically just connecting the dots. He's framing his book as a story told from the helm of his ship, looking back from the future at the whole chain of events that unfolded, all because of warnings that just weren't heeded. So, the whole book is built around this really powerful, simple idea. Kipnis wants us to imagine our planet as a big ship. And guess what? We're all at the helm, sailing right into a massive storm that we actually created. You know, when you're out at sea, you learn pretty fast that you can't just wish a storm away. You gotta read the signs and you gotta change course. This book, well, it's his way of showing us the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Okay, so to really get what he's saying, you have to understand this one core concept, the domino effect. The book lays out this incredible chain reaction where these seemingly small changes in one system, say the ocean, end up triggering a whole series of collapses across the entire planet. So for this explainer, we're going to follow that chain domino by domino. Now, according to the captain's account, the very first domino to fall was the one he knew the best, the sea. I mean, this is a man who spent his entire life reading its moods, and he writes about how, over time, its voice just got louder and angrier and more insistent. The story really starts right in his own backyard. He describes watching Biscayne Bay, a place that was his home, his school, slowly turned from this vibrant fish nursery into, well, a graveyard. And it wasn't one single thing, right? It was this sequence. Pollution fed these massive algae blooms. Then, when the algae died, it sucked all the oxygen out of the water, which killed the seagrass. And then, rising seas drowned the mangroves. It was a total ecosystem collapse, happening in slow motion. But beyond the pollution he could actually see, Kipnis points to this silent thief, ocean acidification. He calls it the deepest threat because you couldn't see it. It didn't make headlines like overfishing did, but it was fundamentally rewriting the chemistry of the water, molecule by molecule, and just unraveling the food chain from the very bottom up. And this is where you really see the human cost. Kipnis remembers fishing off Guatemala back around 2025, when the water was just teeming with life. He'd raised 20 sailfish in a single day. But when he went back decades later, the water looked the same, but it was empty. 5 sails was a lucky day. The local fishermen, they knew the water was different, even if they couldn't tell you the chemistry. That inheritance of the sea, passed down from father to son, it was just broken. And then there was the blob. It started out as just this weird scientific curiosity, this stubborn patch of warm water off the coast of Alaska, but it grew into a full-blown marine desert. It basically created a hollow ocean. The warmth starved the plankton, which starved the little fish, which starved the crabs, the birds, even the orcas. There's this one captain quoted in the book who puts it so starkly. He says, "It feels like the ocean died in the night and no one told us." So, as the book shows, a sick ocean doesn't just keep its problems to itself. It infects everything, the atmosphere, the continents. This is where the next domino in the chain starts to wobble, and it's about to fall right out of the sea and onto the land. A huge part of this is something Kipnis calls the wandering wind. So you have the jet stream, right? That river of air high above us. It gets its power from the temperature difference between the super cold Arctic and the warmer south. But here's the thing. As the Arctic warmed up way faster than the rest of the planet, that tension just slackened. The river of air slowed down, and it started to get wavy and just stall out. And the consequences of that wandering wind, well, they were global. Weather systems didn't just pass over us anymore, they parked. A heat dome would just sit and bake Kansas for 40 days straight, causing total crop failure. In Europe, a storm that should have been gone in a couple of days just lingered over Germany for 2 weeks, causing these unbelievable floods. And the polar vortex, no longer held in place, would just spill south and freeze Texas solid, shattering its power grid. At the very same time, the warmer oceans were basically pouring gasoline on hurricanes. Kipnis says this ushered in a new age of storms. And they weren't just stronger, they were slower. A hurricane would just hover over a coastline, not for hours, but for days, turning a weather event into a relentless siege that no seawall could ever hope to stop. So, while the coasts were drowning, The interiors of continents were on fire. Widespread drought led to an era of mega fires. And we're not talking about just big fires. Kipnis describes these as firestorms that literally created their own weather, spawning fire tornadoes and shooting smoke so high into the atmosphere that it circled the globe, turning skies orange on totally different continents. The land had found its own monstrous voice. So, of course, all these environmental catastrophes weren't happening in some kind of bubble. They were tipping over the final and maybe the most fragile dominoes of all, human societies. The book's next crucial point is that environmental collapse will always inevitably trigger social collapse. The book chronicles this really grim descent, and it breaks it down into 4 stages. First came the hungry earth, as the world's breadbaskets, like the American Midwest, just failed, leading to global food shortages. That, in turn, triggered the Great Migration, with tens of millions of people displaced. And what happens next? The age of conflict, as nations started fighting over what little was left. And finally, all of this led to the shattered order, where global cooperation just broke down, replaced by nationalism and fear. Kipnis even lays out a timeline for these choices, calling it the fork in the road. He points to these key periods, like the derailment and then the return to denial. That was a time when, according to the book, a little bit of progress was completely undone by a retreat into short-term thinking. And that path ultimately led past a point of no return, kicking off decades of cascading collapse. It's really just a story of missed chances. And in the end, the book brings us right back to where we started, standing at the helm of the ship. It forces this final reckoning with the whole theme of choice and the very real consequences of leaving the wheel unattended for too long. You know, one of the most powerful ideas in the whole book is that the end doesn't come with a big bang, like in the movies. He calls it the long fade. It's the slow generational decline. The first generation remembers what supermarkets were like. The second generation only knows scarcity. And the third? They forget the past entirely, and they inherit this smaller, harsher world as if that's just the way things always were. And this is the final log entry. It's the thought the book leaves us with. The ultimate tragedy, in the captain's telling, isn't that we didn't have the information. It wasn't a lack of warning. The signs were all there, in the water, in the air, in the science. So the final question isn't about what we knew. It's about whether we chose to listen.